Welcome to the Accidental Experts podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Hamilton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist. I have been in practice for over 15 years, and I'm also a mom of 4. So I know the challenges both professionally and personally. I'm so glad that you're here today to grow your parenting toolbox. Please come as you are and be ready to learn. My goal is to make you the accidental expert so that you can raise healthy humans. Hi, guys. Welcome back. I hope that you're enjoying our episodes. Today, we're going to be talking about how to get divorced with your kids in mind. This can be a very difficult topic for so many families. And so we have a specialist in getting divorced. Her name is Shannon Sorensen, and she is an attorney. She's been in practice for over 24 years, and 15 years of that, more recently, have been specifically in family law. So she's both an attorney, a mediator, and a guardian ad litem, which is basically an advocate for children in the process of getting divorced. And she's going to talk to us about this topic. It's something that she handles every day, and she's going to give us some tips and tricks and some advice on how to keep our kids in mind while going through this divorce process. With that, let's get to Shannon.
Thank you, Bryce. Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're so glad you're here. Okay, so we have to say, as a disclaimer, just to start, that Shannon is going to be talking about Kansas law. Specifically, if we bring up certain things, a lot of things are applicable universally, but also some stuff is very state specific. So when we're talking about this, keep in mind that your state may be different than what we're talking about. So it's really important that we consult a legal professional like an attorney. So let's get started. Okay, so what is your advice to parents about getting divorced? So this is such a general question, but being a guardian ad litem and an attorney who helps families go through divorce, like what advice do you have for them?
Well, probably the number one thing is put your children at the top of your agenda, which is maybe easier said than done. When I
Yeah.
meet with people, there's a Lee Joy Carson did an article back in 2004, and it's 14 points that basically it suggested guidelines for parents during separation or divorce proceedings. And, think of your children's interests, their present, future, and emotional and mental health before reacting. And I know that's really hard sometimes, especially in high emotional settings. And when your whole entire world's being upheaval in your own life, that's, think about how that's impacting your kiddos who may not have the emotional capacity, even because they're still developing, to handle all of that. And maintain your composure, and a good emotional balance is another thing that Lee Joy had suggested, especially verbally, and don't necessarily, take those things, and use them against your children. Allow yourself and your children time to adjust. Remember the best parts of your marriage and share those with your kiddos. This is, your co-parent's still going to be a part of your life, and it's a very significant part of your children's lives. And they want to know that, that you both love them and it's not the kid's fault. And again, assure your children that they're not to blame for the breakup, and that they're not being rejected or abandoned. And again, it's really, really hard when you're trying to manage your own emotions, and helping to support your children. Continue, take away any bitterness or anger, and try to shield your children, from that. Again, it's very, very hard. I always encourage people. Bill Eddy wrote a book. I think it's the 4th edition's out now. It's called Biff. And basically it's like, be brief, keep it short, your response with your co-parent, keep it informative, keep it friendly, but also keep it firm, and setting those boundaries, and trying to keep emotions out when you are either writing messages or even interacting with your kids. And, don't criticize the other parent, your co-parent, in front of your children. I know it's easier said than done because people want to play the blame game, but, again, it's about your kids. And don't encourage your kids to take sides.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, again, it's hard, especially if, for example, you felt like you've been left for a third party, or, and so it's really important for you to suggest that, encourage your kids to spend time with your co-parent, and try to keep your kids' routine as much the same as possible. I know that, especially if parents have, separated, that's one thing that parents should try to stay on the same page, and saying, even though we may have 2 different homes, we're going to try to keep things as as similar for our kids as they go between the two houses. Obviously, and then in addition to the emotional stuff, you've got the financial pressures, and trying to shield your kids from that. Don't let them know that what may be going on, and try to, make sacrifices. Encourage your kids, that there are going to be sacrifices financially, but not necessarily talking to your kids about that. Mm-hmm. And then, and so those are just some things as far as what should be, a parent should consider. And, and just also, recognize that, you're human, and, and you're going to have these emotions, and that's fine. And you're probably going to not have your best parenting moments during that process, but show yourself some grace. Yeah. And also show the grace to your co-parent.
Yeah. I mean, this is so hard, right? Because it really is a total restructuring of your entire family system, and something that most people haven't planned for. I mean, we get married to imagine that we're going to stay together. So then when that doesn't happen for whatever reason, and we have kids involved, it is life-changing for everybody. So giving ourselves time to kind of process through, and maybe saving the emotion for specific people. Like I've told parents in my practice to say, like, okay, have a certain person that you can be like, okay, I need to process this, or I need to say something. I don't necessarily need feedback, but like, I need to say I'm really mad, or this is so frustrating or irritating. And then that kind of keeps the kids out of that middle. But it's hard because we do have emotions, and especially when money's involved and kids, right, are involved, like those two things seem to make people's worst sides come out. And oftentimes it seems like it gets worse before it gets better. Do you see that?
I do. And then I think it kind of rears its head again, whether or not, maybe when someone, the parents bring in a new person, mm-hmm. And that, it can kind of get a little difficult again. And recognizing that you shouldn't try to force your co-parent to co-parent with your new partner, or new significant other, or whatever that may look like, because you don't know if that person's going to remain in your children's life. And granted, you want to have a friendly relationship, but I find that when a third person comes in and doesn't necessarily stay in their lane, is when it gets bad again. Yeah. And unfortunately, the kiddos are the ones who suffer. And then unfortunately, sometimes the old wounds are ripped open, and mm-hmm. It's like going through the divorce process again for kids. And so I just, it's, again, it takes a village. And I think you should encourage your kids to accept that potential individual, even if it's hard for you, but recognize that the more adults that love your children and care for your children and part of their life, the better your kids are going to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Truly, when people do care about your kids, that is, no one loses there. Right. But I think it's like when we get offended or we're upset, it's really the grown up a lot of times, right? The kids are really resilient. And mm-hmm. that's something that I encourage parents with in my practice, is like, kids can handle the change, right? Like staying with a spouse who maybe is not the best fit, right? Or because of whatever is going on, is not necessarily the best choice if you're only doing that for the kids. Like kids are resilient, and having a happy home is way better than having parents who are constantly in conflict with each other. But that can be really hard. And it's obviously a personal decision. But I think parents have to also consider that like other people may come into their kids' lives, and that can be good if we're like encouraging our kids in that way, but also just like so hard. So putting a lot of support in place sounds like a really good strategy. Also letting our kids have their feelings, and maybe we support our kids. So they say like, I'm upset with mommy about this, or I'm upset with daddy about this, saying like, oh, I understand, but maybe not sharing your own stuff where it's like, oh, that's happened to me too. I totally understand. Like we can understand our kids' frustrations without sharing things that might make it more hard for our kids. Like sometimes they don't want our story in that part. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. So, well, you would be very careful not to, I guess, what do they call it in your world? It's parentification, mm-hmm. Of our children, and using them for emotional support, because it's not That's not what they're for.
Yeah. 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 We really have to protect our kids in that part of like allowing them to stay kids. And even, like when our kids are older, even if they're, older teens or young 20s when we're going through this process, we still need to let them be our kids. And so they're not going to be the person who's going to provide that support, because then it forces them to feel like they're in the middle of this. And they're not in the middle. Like as much as we can, I mean, they are, but as much as we can preserve that ability for them to float between the two houses, that makes it so much easier. And then they tend to want to continue to float between the two houses when the relationship is good. But it's like oftentimes I think the parent who causes the most chaos, and that inadvertently ends up being the parent that the kid doesn't want to spend time with sometimes. Not that they get to choose, but it seems to be more resistant. Do you see that?
No, absolutely. And so basically it's kind of, but it's interesting because the rejected parent
Hmm.
versus the preferred parent doesn't recognize that. They think the preferred parent is, and I'll use a word that's been debunked in our profession, is alienating the
Hmm.
children. And that's not the case. The rejected parent doesn't understand that their own behaviors and actions are why the children are rejecting them and prefer to be with the less chaotic parent.
Yeah.
And so I think it's also important for parents to look at resources and figure out how they can better keep kind of the calm,
Yeah.
and kind of what you're saying as far as teenagers don't want the chaos. For
No, I
sure.
mean, they have enough chaos in their own lives. They do
Right,
definitely do not need their parents'
right.
chaos. Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and and the Split Outreach Project has different videos and also programs for kiddos based on their development age, and they have a good video for teenagers. And I think that people who again are what would apply to like separating from like a 1 to 5 year olds different than a 5 to 10, and they're
Hmm.
on, and teenagers have their own little uniqueness, like you said,
Yeah.
and being a teenager this day with all the chaos, and then adding the people of their family, it just it's a lot.
Yeah, totally. Well, and how we present it to them, how we talk to them, I think being honest, but not too informative, right? To
Correct.
be talking about what is happening without including them in the drama gives them the most power to kind of
Right.
like understand the circumstance, but not get involved in the circumstance. When our kids are starting to fight against the other person, like mom said this, or dad said this, or don't do this, or do this, that, and it's not about them, it's about the other parent, that is where things get really complicated and then make them feel responsible for kind of navigating this. And that is not their responsibility and really hurts them in the long run.
Absolutely. And then you also have to be careful because teenagers are, well, kids are manipulative anyway, but teenagers have the ability, probably more so, to triangulate parents, especially if the parents aren't talking. And unfortunately, they have the ability to get themselves into trouble. And
Hmm.
that's where I think that, parents have to probably co-parent more so for teenagers than they do the younger ones, and they have to be on the same page because like you were saying, mom said whatever, dad said whatever, well, I'm going to go to Joe's house, but I told dad I'm going to Joey's house, and it's like, well, where are they? It's kind
Yeah.
of like you want to be able to pick up the phone and say, okay, hey, co-parent,
Yeah.
and this is what I was told, what were you told? Because
Hmm.
the kiddos have the ability to kind of get themselves into a situation if they don't parent the two parents, co-parents, are not talking.
Hmm.
It's scary. It's a scary world out there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice to think about that part too of like, it's our kids' safety ultimately, right? You may not have feelings about this person anymore, and you may have or very negative feelings about them, but it's really about our kids and their safety, and knowing that we're aligned actually helps that process of keeping them safe. I love that. So what other things do you think parents do that really hurt their kids in this divorce process?
I think the biggest thing is probably, it's arguing, talking, about the other parent behind their backs, and interrogating their kids when they come back,
Hmm.
about what happened there, who was there, and what did they do, type of thing, and then also taking their anger against the other parent out on the kiddos. Like,
Hmm.
it's interesting, and representing kids and their interest, when they say, I'm a lot like my mom, and my dad really sees that and will comment about how I'm just so much like my mom, and I feel like he doesn't love me.
Mm.
And and
Ouch.
that's,
Yeah.
yeah, that's hard. And so I
Hmm.
think that it's like, well, the kiddos are half of us, they're each a part of our mom and we're part of our dad.
Yeah.
And recognizing that, the good, bad, and ugly that our kiddos may have it all. And so we're going to have to, again, keep that in check. But yeah, I think that's what I see as the biggest thing is, the disgust or whatever feeling they may have for their co-parent, and then taking it out on the kids, especially if that kiddo does remind them of their ex or soon to be ex.
Yeah. And that is hard. I mean, there are parts of, I mean, even in my nuclear family, like that we have that are each of my kids are some ways like their dad and some ways like me. And I think when we are loving that person or in love with them, it's actually something we really appreciate. And then when things are maybe not that way, then we don't appreciate it. But our kids didn't change. It's us, right? It's the
Mhm.
grown-ups
Right.
that we've made choices. And so celebrating that of like, and I think, something I encourage parents to remember is like, you married this person, like you chose to have kids with them. And you have to frame the part of like, when you had that kid with that person, probably you were in love with them. And so that
Right.
kid was made out of love. And so like allowing them the space to stay in that place of love. Like if you're fighting over your kid, most of the time it's because you love them, not
Right.
because you hate your partner, but it's because you love them. And so like reminding yourself about that part and that your partner is fighting back because they love them too, right? And yes, there are extenuating circumstances where things happen that get really complicated, but for the most part, I find that it's just about this fear of missing out on kids' lives and about not being present. And I think the more that we work together, the more that that is possible, right? Like everybody
Absolutely.
can go to Sam's baseball game, right? Like
Right.
that is a public thing that everybody can go to regardless of what day it is. And that we can make our kids a priority even when it's not days that they're staying at our house. And I think the further we get away from the divorce part, the more that things seem to settle down and we can develop a new normal. And that's what kids want the most, right? Is just to
Absolutely.
like
Mhm.
acclimate into this new realm of where we're going to be now. Like our parents are getting divorced. Okay. And let's move into a new schedule. And it's better when we're doing that. Like we're making the transition faster versus kind of dragging it out. I think a lot of times families think about that part of like it's easier for them, but ultimately it's like whatever the schedule is going to be, let's move into that sooner rather than later so that the kids can adjust.
Absolutely. I would agree
Yeah.
100%
Yeah.
for sure.
Okay. So we talked earlier that you're a GAL or guardian ad litem. What is that? And then when does somebody like you get involved in that capacity?
Well, it varies. It's big as far as like we represent the kid's interest. And a lot of times in custody cases, if there's, obviously if there's been any type of abuse or neglect, you've got somebody who the court needs to kind of look in. If you've got a parent who's got some substance abuse issues and or you maybe or mental health issues, there are somebody who come in and represent the kid's interest. They're not necessarily the lawyer for the kiddo, but they will, meet with the mom and dad and the kids, maybe the kid's therapist, maybe the parent's therapist, there may be a situation where they have they suggest parents take some parenting classes in addition to what's already required to by the court. There might be a situation where they need to do an evaluation, a mental health evaluation, or a substance abuse evaluation, and then they make recommendations. Sometimes they do it written, or sometimes they just do it orally and make recommendations about how to help this family, especially the kiddos. And the court, I'd say most of the time follows those recommendations. So again about eyes and ears to the court on the kiddos and the family overall. It's kind of like it's not necessarily a social worker per se, but it's very similar
Mhm.
as far as like kind of going in and triaging and see what they need to do and making suggestions as far as, as maybe you have somebody who has supervised time and maybe looking at what that may look like to expand that parenting time based on, how they're progressing with one of the parents and the kids. And so, it's again just eyes and ears, and for the court to make suggestions and recommendations for the kids on the behalf of the kids.
Yeah. So that makes sense. I work with a lot of guardian items in my
Mhm.
practice. And I think exactly what you said of like giving the kids a voice sometimes or like hearing their perspective, but you're not necessarily their attorney, right? Like they don't get to choose what it is, but you're looking at the whole system, right?
Right.
Both mom and dad and the kids and what's going on and then making recommendations. So can you guys make recommendations for parenting time too? Like to say like this is going to be the schedule or things like that?
Yes, they do. It's of course, and sometimes, especially if the parents don't agree, just so
Yeah.
because if they'll come in and say the kids are doing fine, and it's interesting. I call it the Johnson County schedule, and it's practice. It's in all counties, but it's a 2-2-5. It's and it kind of it's like either a Monday Tuesday with mom, Wednesday Thursday with dad, and then alternating the weekends. And so
Hmm.
it's and that's what kind of a lot of people do, which is different than the traditional, which used to be the every other weekend, one overnight during the week. That's kind of how they expanded it as far as like
Hmm.
splitting time. A lot of times, as the kids, it's also evolved into like a week to week type of thing. And every family, has its own things, but a guardian ad litem can say, hey, you know what, the 2-2-5 doesn't work with this family because of so and so's work schedule. It seems to be like their shared time is appropriate, maybe a week to week, or
Hmm.
sometimes younger ones, they do it on a 2-week rotating basis where it's a 2-2-3, because as kids are younger, developmentally, they shouldn't go long periods of time, like 5 days, without seeing either parent,
Yeah, it's a
because
long time. Yeah.
totally. And
Hmm.
so it they can take, and so a guardian ad litem can make those suggestions based on the kids, the family, those type of things. And like I said, the courts really kind of rely on those individuals.
Yeah. Well, and parents can make their own schedule, right? Like if they can
Absolutely.
agree on it, and ultimately that's best, right? But
Yes.
sometimes there is a lot of conflict
Right.
and families aren't able to come to an agreement. And so then a guardian ad litem is a great person to come along because they can make recommendations and do have the authority. So like in my practice, could I make recommendations on parenting plans? Yes. But do I? No, because I want to empower the parents to do it, for them to navigate through, or to have a guardian ad litem to do it because they get to collect the whole part and kind of be the, I mean, it's not really an investigator, but somebody who's collecting all the data points to make a real informed decision versus me hearing one part. Even if I hear both parents' side, I am not qualified to really do that. And I want to kind of put it on to somebody like you to kind of make those decisions for us with, whatever thoughts I have in mind, like, hey, this is causing conflict, can you make a recommendation around this or take this into consideration? So that's great for us too, to make sure all voices are heard. Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, no, no. And we definitely rely obviously on, individual therapists about, especially with kids, like, hey, how's the adjustment going? Is this going well? What do we need to tweak type of thing? And so I think
Hmm.
it's always important, I think, for people to, all kind of collaborate. And I was going to ask you real quickly, do you only talk to guardian ad litems and litigation cases, or do you talk to parents' attorneys as well? Because I know that some therapists
Yes.
will limit whom they communicate with.
So if there's a guardian ad litem involved, then I primarily only work with that because then all the information is going to that person and then they can kind of disseminate it. And that way it's not favored to one person or
Sure.
the other. But if there's no guardian ad litem, then I will talk to attorneys, but I kind of like them to be on a conference call, honestly, because
Sure.
it saves time, but then everybody hears the same thing and I don't have to repeat it and nothing's, taken out of context. So I think,
Right.
that seems to be the best way, but lots of therapists do things differently,
Sure.
but that seems to work well for me. And honestly, I try to stay out of the court system, but I think it is helpful when I think that kids need to be advocated for, but yeah, I mean, we do it all the time. So let's talk about, so as parents are listening to this, we're talking about keeping kids in mind. And sometimes parents will say to me, we're going to get divorced via mediation or some type of a cooperative divorce. And is that possible? Like, what do you see in your practice? Is this like, what are your thoughts on this?
Absolutely. And it's interesting because in the most of the local the counties, local rules state, they require mediation if there's any issues that are still at dispute. And so it's mandatory. And so, but a lot of times, you can just use a mediator if people
Hmm.
are really, if they're, you can use the mediator to go in and work out the issues. They can kind of be your scribe, draft up things. Kansas makes it fairly easy for mediators to kind of help walk the people through the process, as far as like coming up with an agreement, a parenting plan, support, poverty settlement agreement. And so which is kind of like, you can use a mediator, but then you'd also had mentioned like collaborative, which collaborative is it's a little different. It uses mediation, but you have different professionals involved. Typically in collaboration, each parent has a lawyer. Then you have someone who as a financial person who comes in and addresses the finances. Then you have like a therapist or somebody who addresses like the parenting plan issues, and then they all work together and to kind of do it collaboratively. And so, but you have all these different professionals taking care of their own little niche. And in the event that either parent wants to go to the litigation route, then they have to both attorneys basically stop representation, and they have to go in and get a new representation. And so, collaborative is, and mediation or collaborative, I mean, or even like a hybrid of any of those are definitely better than having, the traditional litigation and, all out war in court, because nothing is worse than sitting in court and listening to a co-parent or a parent say something's the worst things about that person, because words hurt,
Yeah. I mean, we carry that, and then that burden ends up hurting our kids, right? Because yes, we all have negative qualities, right? No one is perfect walking around. And so there are certainly things that could be better about each of us, but to hear it aired to everybody else, and that can be embarrassing too, right? To have your worst things told to other people. So it does make sense. And so on the financial side too, obviously there's so specific situations, but I hear families tell me that when they do a collaborative or mediation route, that it is also a less expensive route most of the time if they're able to go that way.
Absolutely, for sure.
Yeah.
And and that's one thing about not only the Kansas Supreme Court, but then also the Johnson County website. It has it has a self-help center with lots of great pro se forms. And the people, if people wanted to do it themselves, like maybe go meet with the mediator and then kind of do it themselves, they make it very user friendly. And definitely is the best, it's the way to do it, because one is more economical, and so you've got your financial stress you're eliminating, and two, it's you can put some closure in and start that schedule like you were indicating that kids need, and so they start their new normal.
Yeah. So it's so important, and obviously every family has to make a decision based on what's best, but I think the less stress that we as parents are having, the less stress our kids are going to feel, and the better we're going to transition to our new normal.
Right.
So,
yeah. And I also want to mention that Wyandotte County has a self-help center too, as well, in their courthouse, which is,
okay.
So I should just, so it just is an FYI for people and they can help give guidance as well.
Well, and I would imagine lots of like county courts do the same thing regardless of what state you're in. And so you could just contact your county if they're not Johnson County or Wyandotte County or Jackson or what's the other big one in Missouri?
Oh, there's Clay. Yeah.
Yep.
And Missouri Supreme Court has pro se forms on their website.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So what do you think parents need to keep in mind while getting divorced? We kind of talked about this, but just having in mind as they're going through this process.
This is not the end of the world. It's going to be different. There's going to be some growing pains, just like when you got married. It's just going to be different, and different's not bad.
Yeah.
And it's like, again, it may be really, really hard on you, but it's going to be, even though kids are resilient, it's going to be really, really tough on them, and making sure that you're just available to whatever they may need, and that may mean that they need to get into therapy to figure out their stuff. And there is going to be some regressive behaviors. And so I think that, some people are like, oh my gosh, my little one didn't, is wetting the bed again. Well, there's changes, so it's not like they're being abused or anything. It's about, there's changes. And so again, it's, and even though maybe the breakdown of the marriage was due to communication, communicating with your co-parent is imperative, and it's more so now. And so a lot of times the courts will have like different parenting applications, or like Our Family Wizard, like communications or whatever. And so if you can't do it face to face or during text or anything like that, you could use a platform where you can communicate about your kiddos, because it's hard to share your kids, and when you're not seeing your kids every day, that's tough. And so I think that you need to figure out how the two of you are going to be able to figure, have some sort of communication about your kids. And again, just recognize that you're human, and
Mhm.
you're not going to have your best parenting moments, and you're going to mess up, and it's okay. Your kids are going to survive. It's just,
Yeah.
but give, time does heal
Yeah.
all wounds.
Yeah. I mean, it just helps to process through. I mean, getting our own support, right, in
Right.
this process of like having a therapist for ourselves or somebody who is very well versed in helping kids navigate through divorce, right? And sometimes I have parents who come in through that part of like everybody is together, right? We're doing a collaborative session with like all the people to talk about, to give the kids a voice in that. Sometimes it's about working individually with your kid and yourself and a therapist, and talking through challenges to allow them to vocalize stuff. And then ultimately, right, just like loving our kids,
Right.
right? Like keeping them, like you said in the beginning, like the first priority of like, this is really about protecting you and less about protecting me, and putting them as the priority. Obviously, as parents, we need to protect ourselves too. That's
Yeah.
good, right? And that might look like going to therapy or having a support group or something like that to navigate through. But thinking about our kids primarily, because they're really who we need to be looking out for. Anything else
Absolutely.
that you feel like we need to
Yeah.
cover?
Well, I think, obviously not only taking care of your mental health, but also take care of yourself physically. Make sure you're
Yes.
getting enough sleep. Make sure you're eating correctly. Make sure you're not trying to numb your feelings with certain substances. I mean, obviously I'm not saying be a teetotaler, but, think about, being healthy, because
Yeah.
you are only as good a parent as to your kiddos as you feel. And so
Mhm.
if you're not feeling good and you're not taking care of yourself, then you're not going to be good for your kiddos. And that's sometimes easier said than done. I get that. It's like, you really feel like your world's falling apart. You just want to lay in bed all day. You don't want to take care of the household things. You need to do that for your kiddos, and you need to
Mhm.
do it for yourself, because
Yeah.
you need to love yourself. Because
Mhm.
if you don't love yourself, even though you can't love your kids.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, and it's like, yeah, we're also modeling this really hard stuff, right? Like
Right.
it could be the hardest thing that we've gone through, but our kids are going to go through hard stuff too that may look totally different. And we're setting this model, even though it's hard, right, to
Right.
navigate through, and to like be like, let's go for a walk, right? Or like,
Yeah.
mommy's having these feelings or daddy's having these feelings. Like, let's go out. Physical activity feels good. Let's go do something fun. Let's go to the park. Let's, right? Like, let's build something, whatever it is that sometimes getting our hands on something, right? To like build or do art or whatever gives us an outlet to kind of express our emotions, but also is spending time with our kids, right? Which is ultimately
Absolutely.
what this whole thing is about, is wanting to spend time. So like, let's not miss out on that time. Let's take advantage of the time that we have with our kids to do stuff that is building our relationship together. That's great advice.
Yes, absolutely. And think about when your kids aren't with you. Actually, it's you use it as a time of respite.
Mm-hmm.
To maybe explore new hobbies or do something that you couldn't do if because they're with their co-parents, they're not having to pay for a babysitter. Think about how the positive as well, like
Mm-hmm.
the fact that maybe you want to go do pottery. Well, you don't have to pay for a babysitter and the pottery class. You can just go do pottery, and
Yeah.
truly, it's really, if you start focusing on the positives, and I know it's hard to say that, but it may just be a little thing. Oh, I get to sleep in this Saturday morning because the kids aren't here. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, you know, celebrate that. It's okay. It's okay to
Yeah.
feel that way and to take that time when they're not there to do something you want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Self-care is so important, regardless of what the situation is between parents, but like just generally self-care, but especially in these times of big changes and when it's hard for us too. That's also really good advice. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time today. I know that this will be really helpful. We'll include some resources in our show notes so that you guys can look at that. And with that, we'll say thank you so much, Shannon, for being here today.
Thank you, Bryce. You take care.
Thanks again, Shannon. That was all really good information. Again, be cognizant of, we didn't really talk a ton about state related things, but there are some states that have different rules and counties with different rules. So definitely look at your county and state for specific advice. But I wanted to review a couple things that Shannon said because I thought she had some really good suggestions. First is putting your kids first. And that is sometimes not that easy, actually. And it can be really difficult difficult for us to think about what's in their best interest versus getting back at the other person. The second thing was to do self-care, to look at this as a change that can create opportunity to have time for ourselves. And also a change can be good sometimes, depending on what the circumstances have been, even if this wasn't something that you were wanting. And the final thing is knowing that you will get through this. I know a lot of times when hard things happen, we feel like we're not going to make it through, but you will. And getting a support system and a village to help you support both your kids, but also yourself is good. With that, I'll say thank you so much for coming today, for showing up, for listening. Please rate and subscribe to us. If you like what we're doing, please share us with your friends, follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and keep the emails coming. I'm loving seeing all the topics that people are requesting. So send us an email to accidentalexperts@gmail.com. Thank you so much and have a fantastic day. Some words from our legal team.
The information presented in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for appropriate professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this podcast, is for general information purposes only. This podcast makes no representations and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or information on or available through this podcast, and such information is subject to change without notice. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained through this program with other sources and review all information regarding any condition or treatment with the appropriate professionals.
What we're saying is, yes, I am a real therapist, but I'm not your therapist.